what do I hope you get out of this tonight? Looking for you to understand some of the common things leaders say or do that contradict an agile transformation. Also to understand how some of these contradictions not only cause people to lose faith in their leaders, and you might be saying, well, maybe that's not so terrible, but it may just cause confusion. I'm going to ask Mindy to help us out with hitting mute. I don't know if I can hit mute on. Thank you. I was having trouble hearing. So those contradictions may not be the worst thing for losing faith in your leaders, but may just cause the confusion. Because if we don't understand our goals and objectives, or more importantly, how we're trying to meet those goals and objectives together, chances are we're not really going to meet those. So what can we do about that? Now, whether you are one of those leaders, or whether you're a coach or a scrum master who has the responsibility of coaching up in the organization, I'm going to also share some really realistic tips that any leader can take and use to start beginning these kinds of changes. So the phrase that I'd like to draw your attention to is one I'm sure you've heard by now. When a very well-intentioned leader maybe holds a town hall event or sends out an email or has a recording of them saying, "We've decided we're going agile." My question is, what does that mean? And more importantly, where is that? Because agility isn't a place, it's not some mystical destination. And sometimes I feel like said leader may not have done enough due diligence to find out exactly the kind of structural and behavioral change these things require. Maybe they heard a buzzword at some conference they went to. Maybe they read a Gartner article and they think agile is the flavor of the day. But to say, we're going agile, that's not really helpful to the people who are doing the work, because the word agile in and of itself could mean all kinds of different things. And generally, when we say, where the heck are you going? You could translate that as why? Why are we going to do this? Why are we going to change the entire way we're going to do work? And on the screen, I'm showing you the very popular State of Agile survey that gets published every year. And I'll tell you, I have followed this survey all 14 years that it has been published. And that top answer, I don't believe has changed. The top response from the people who do respond to the survey, it's always about speed, accelerate software delivery, accelerate time to market, get it out there faster. Here's the challenge with that. We can get busy going faster. I can deliver a steaming pile of crap for you, heck of a lot faster. Who cares if the customer doesn't want it? Who cares if it's not something they need or want, or it's got bugs, but we delivered it faster. So I think phrases like that are dangerous because it gives the illusion that this is about some sort of hyper productivity or twice the work, when that's not it at all. We're trying to deliver value. We're trying to make sure that we're delighting our customers. Agile is just one of those ways we could achieve those goals and objectives. So it's important to understand why we're undertaking this kind of a change. And when you talk about goals and objectives, going agile isn't a goal, because any of the agile methods are different ways of doing work. Imagine if you're like me with the last year and some of this COVID and quarantining at home, and you find yourself putting on a few pounds, let's just say. Well, if I call up a personal trainer and I say, hey, you're going to coach me, even if it's over video, even if it's over Zoom, we're going to do this virtually. They're likely to say, what's your goal? And if I say, well, I just want to lose weight. I want to lose some weight. That's likely not going to be good enough for that coach, for that trainer to be able to help me. They're probably going to say, how much weight? Because until we have a measurable goal, we have no idea what it is you're trying to do. All right, let's just say I respond 15 pounds. I think 15 pounds is a great goal. Well, then they're likely to tell me to get on a scale because we've got to take a baseline measurement. We've got to know before this workout routine starts or diet changes start what that measurement is. Because then as we start making these changes to my routine, are we meeting goals and objectives? Are we not meeting goals and objectives? Are we meeting goals and objectives? Are we not meeting goals and objectives? So that's why saying we're going agile, just start sprinting. You could be sprinting all right. You could just be sprinting, you're running, but you're probably running the race to nowhere because goals and objectives are measurable. So a company has to know what it's measuring, regardless of the A word. And by the A word, I mean agile, or if you like to say agile or agile, whatever floats your boat there. But company leaders need to know what metrics are meaningful to the company without saying the A word. Why are you in business? Why are the lights on? What do the customers who are paying your company money, what do they get for the money that they pay you? So there's some measurement. Otherwise, your organizations wouldn't be in business as long as they have been. What measurement are companies looking at before you start talking about going agile? Because in the absence of that, you have no baseline. You have no way of knowing whether this new way of work is meeting those goals and objectives or not meeting those goals and objectives. You're just running that race to nowhere. So I like to ask leaders that I coach, it's like without even talking about Agile or Scrum, tell me what keeps you awake at night. Tell me what measurements are meaningful to the company. One company that I was working with recently said, we're looking at customer retention because we're in an industry that's dying. The younger crowd doesn't think they need our services. So we're not even looking at new customer acquisition. The number we look at every single day is that customer retention. Are they renewing with us? Okay, that's a measurable goal. If we've got those numbers. Now, if we start translating that into how can changing the way we do work help us meet those goals and objectives? Because if we don't have one, it's not going to fix anything to say agile. It's not going to fix anything to say scrum. It's not going to fix anything to stand up for 15 minutes every day. And even worse, one of the things we're finding is that leaders will turn around and ask scrum teams or agile teams to provide the goals and objectives. What? That's the tail wagging the dog. How are the people who've been asked to accomplish something and they don't know what that something is because no goal has been articulated to them? Now they're asked to provide that very goal. That's not a really effective leader in an organization. The other challenge with the A word is it doesn't mean just one thing. Many of you probably noticed that Agile as a concept has officially been around for 20 years as of last month. In February 2001, 17 people got together at a ski resort to talk about the frameworks you see listed on my slide. Those are the frameworks that were represented at that meeting. And the word that they came up with that encompassed all of these different frameworks is Agile. They actually took inspiration on a book that's really about business. So the book was all about Agile competitors in the age of virtual organizations. And even though that book is well over 20 years old, boy, is that concept relevant right now with all of us thrust into the virtual world due to COVID-19. So when somebody says Agile, they could be talking about Scrum. They could also be talking about extreme programming, DSDM, FDD, or something new that's popped on the scene since 2001. So it's pretty nebulous to just say the word Agile because there are many different frameworks that encompass that. And one of the other things I thought was hilarious in the State of Agile survey that I'd like to draw your attention to, not that Scrum is always the front runner. Every year that I followed this survey, Scrum is over 50%. Each year it's hovered, around 53, 55, 58 now. But when the respondents were asked, do you use an Agile approach? Okay, if they check the box, yes. Okay, tell us which approach you use. And then they have all these choices. Does it scare anybody to see that 3% of the respondents said, yes, we use Agile? Really? Which framework? We don't know. What? Those people are not meeting that organization's goals and objectives because they don't even know the way the organization is trying to do work. So that's one of those things to be mindful of. Not only do our leaders need to do what they do for their day job at the organization, which is why are we in business and what are our goals and objectives? But if they decide we're going to upset the apple cart and change the whole way work is done, that's not a simple thing. There's got to be a lot of conversation about what that means, which approach would best fit us from not only an organizational standpoint, but also what problems we're trying to solve. But if the people you're asking to go Agile don't even know what approach they're trying, not likely that you're going to meet your goals and objectives. So the Agile Manifesto is the output of that event at Snowbird in February 2001. Yes, many of the people there were involved with software development, and they put that right in the title. I would invite you to cross off the word software. If you are working in a physical product environment, maybe you make hardware, maybe you're a services organization like mine, and that just doesn't apply to you. So we could say Agile Services Manifesto. Or if you have a physical product, you could say Agile Product Development. But this is just a different way to do work. So if your leaders are telling you, we're going Agile, we're going to implement this Agile management tool that you all have to follow. Well, look at the very first value. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So if you just dictated to everybody the very tool they have to use, we're already hindering their agility. We're already contradicting one of the first things your people are likely to learn when they go to any training class about this stuff. The more important part is individuals and interactions, talking to each other and letting the people doing the work decide what's the best process, what's the best tool, given the problems we've been asked to solve. Working product, customer collaboration, responding to change, those are the more important things. Not that you're not going to have those things on the right. Well, of course, every organization has those things: plans, documents, contracts, statements of work, whatever you call those. The things on the left are more important. So we don't want to get into that old trap where somebody sells something and signs a contract, comes into the company, throws it over the wall to the people who have to do the work. And those poor people are going, who the hell signed this contract? This is not possible. So customer collaboration over contract negotiation was intended by these authors to stop that behavior, to stop the contract game. And responding to change happens. The plan is stale the minute it comes off your printer. The planning is the more important part. The individuals and interactions and the customer collaboration. Now we've got to respond to that change. And we're going to get something working and adapt. Sure, we'll write things down, but if you're just doing the old document handoff, shared documents can be completely misunderstood. We could read and misinterpret the written word and not be on the same page at all. So let's get something going. Let's get something, working, and then let's write down our shared understanding. The other big myth is that, okay, even though some people who were in the software development realm wrote these things down, this is not an IT thing. Because a lot of myths out there are, well, that Agile stuff, that's just about information technology. That's just about IT. No, it's not. Probably one of the more abused Agile principles is number 4. Business people and developers must work together. So this is we are all in this together at our organization, aren't we? Rather than business versus IT. Think about that language. I tune into people's language as a coach. And when I hear people talking about each other in companies that way, it sends up a big red flag. For example, if I hear leaders in IT say things like the business, those people in the business, those people in that other department, they. That tells me that there's some internal challenges going on, that we may even be fighting each other about the way we do work. Companies that have a shot at true agility, which is what this is all about, tend to say things like we, teammate, us. So this is we all play for the same company, don't we? We play for the same team, don't we? This is not an IT thing. It's about delighting our customers, delighting our users, because in the year 2021 and beyond, if we're not delighting our customers, they will go somewhere else. But not only do they vote with their feet in their wallet, they get on social media and flame you to everybody, to your potential future customers. That we got the internet to thank for that and social media to thank for that. But if you look at these principles, I can't tell you the number of times where we've gone in and done a leadership workshop or sat down and talked to leaders who have declared they're going agile, sent their people to training, and then they have no idea what is in these principles. For example, Principle 7, we were just talking about goals and objectives. Working software, you could say working product, is the primary measure of progress. There is no KPI, OKR, there's no agile metric. That doesn't even make sense because it's a different way to do work. So does the software work? Does it not? Does the product work? Does it not? Does the customer want it? Do they not want it? How about principle number 8? If you've still got people mandating the death march to you nights and weekends, get this done. We've got to make the date at all costs. That's the opposite of agility. Agile was intended to be sustainable. Sponsors, developers, users should be able to maintain this pace. This is about the sprints. This is about the iterations. So what they meant was no death marches, no nights and weekends. It's not sustainable. You might pull off those heroics once or twice, but how long are you going to be able to do that before you burn your people out and they leave? Look at principle number 11. Best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams, cross-functional teams. So not staying locked into particular role-based silos. So the challenge here is we've got these values and these principles that guide any one of the different frameworks that are agile. And if the organization isn't following suit, even though they've asked people to work this way, we not only set up confusion, we set up challenges to even meet the very goals and objectives they said they wanted to accomplish by this. We get agile in name only adoptions, or as our team likes to call it, scrum butt. That's when your leader says stuff like, we're going to do scrum, but not that part. We're not going to dedicate teams. No, they're not going to be cross-functional. We're going to keep our segregated teams, but we're going to do scrum. Have you even looked at what this means? And then they send people to training who are just confused by what they need to do. What you see on the screen are Post-it notes from graduates of ours. On a little exit in classes, we'd ask people to put up some of their leaders' biggest offenses. It's like, we've been asked to work in an agile way. We've been asked to work in a scrummy way. But then here's what they do. They do drive-bys. So instead of taking direction from the product owner, like we learned when we went to Scrum training, the senior leader swings by and says, no, I just need you to do this one thing. Oh, I need this other special thing. Well, if everything is priority, nothing is. And so now we interrupt people, they lose their focus, and we miss our deadlines. We miss our goals and objectives. The job classifications is an interesting one that I see happening more and more. We've got a team adopting Scrum. Well, there's only 3 roles: product owner, Scrum master, team of developers. And it's very clear in the Scrum guide. No singular role is recognized when you talk about developers. It doesn't mean software development. It means anybody developing the product. It doesn't recognize business analyst, tester, programmer, and so on. Well, let's just say the same organization then asks people not only sends them to training, asks them to get certified in it, and says, you're now this team. Oh, but wait, at review time, no, we're going to trot out your old waterfall job description, and we're going to hold you accountable to that. That's risky for organizations, because when you start talking about people not living up to that old waterfall job classification because they've been asked to work in a completely different way, when you start getting into people either being let go or quitting and telling the world that your company's not a credible one to work at, you've got a real slippery slope going on, especially if we let somebody go for not meeting a waterfall job description when they're asked to work as a team. I always say, as soon as the employment lawyers get wise to this Agile stuff, watch out, because the wrongful termination suits will be stacked up, because that's bait and switch. That's really not fair to do to anybody doing work in your organization. Or we've got leaders saying, well, we're going Agile, you're empowered. And then of course they overrule every decision. Or we're going to do Scrum, but no Scrum Master. We don't need one of those product owners either. How the heck are we supposed to execute this without two of the pivotal roles? And the executive saying Agile means more hours. Principle number 8. So it's starting to sound a little like the definition of insanity. You've probably heard that old adage. What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again. Somehow you expect it to be different. So there's a lot of people out there using scrummy words. They'll even use vocabulary from extreme programming, user stories, story points, right? But yet they're behaving in a waterfallish way. They're still doing work the old way. They're following a project management mindset, handoff from team to team, function to function component model. But because they're using all the new vocabulary, they somehow think this is going to be different, or that we somehow think this is going to meet those goals and objectives or deliver faster. That's not really realistic. The same thing happened in the United States anyway, back in the waterfall movement. Many people may recognize Edwards Deming's name from the work that he did at Toyota. And TPS, Toyota Production System, is one of the things that helped revolutionize the way Toyota ran cars through that process. Now, when Edwards Deming turned his attention back to the United States in the 80s, when we started paying attention to what companies like Toyota were doing, he's like, what is going on here? You guys are copying without knowledge. Not only did the waterfall movement get popularized by a white paper where the author said, don't do any of this, hence Deming's term, copying without knowledge. Nobody bothered to read. They looked at the famous picture that looked like a waterfall. He was frustrated by the Toyota speak and people talking about lean Six Sigma. We're going to do the Toyota way. And he's like, how are you going to know if what you're copying is right? How do you even know what the hell to copy? Because none of you have gotten knowledgeable about what's actually going on. It's pretty impossible to copy another company's culture. You have to take the journey for yourself. You can be inspired by another organization's decisions, but you need to sit down and have the conversations for yourselves. We need to have the learning for ourselves. And so the other challenge is that your organization may be copying without knowledge, which is alive and well in the Agile movement. And I can prove it in every single Scrum class. I'll beg people to read the Scrum Guide, which is free. And then when we start talking about the fact that user stories aren't in the Scrum framework, I watch people's heads split open. But that's what we're doing. It's like, read the Scrum Guide. I'm telling you the truth. Well, then how come we're doing that? I don't know. You guys copying without knowledge? And it's not that any of those things are bad. They're not good either. The more important thing is, when did a product owner sit down and talk to the other people and say, does putting things in this story format help us? Does it confuse us? Does it advance our understanding or our goal, or is it a bunch of busy work? Because if you look at the definition from extreme programming, stories were supposed to be told, not written, told to the people doing the work. And then they were supposed to write down for themselves so that it made sense. But if you're just having people formerly known as analysts writing user stories and handing it off to somebody else that's reading it, smells a lot like a requirements document being handed over. So this copying without knowledge is alive and well in the Agile community. And so leaders who don't understand, who don't get knowledgeable, who don't set the goals and objectives, who don't find out what these things mean, and then have the conversations are at the heart of a lot of this dysfunction. So most of the Agile methods, Scrum in particular, requires change. Hence my reference to definition of insanity. Because if you don't want to change, don't. Because people will get kind of defensive about that, saying, well, is it bad? Is it good? Is it right? Is it wrong? It has nothing to do with that. Are you meeting your goals and objectives? Or are you not meeting your goals and objectives? If you're delighting your customers, who cares what you call, what you're doing? The more important thing there is not right, wrong, bad, good. It's why are we doing this? Is it advancing our goal? Is it hurting us? Are we actually changing? Or are we just doing the same thing over and over again, but somehow expecting it to be different because we're using Scrummy words? So Scrum in particular requires behavioral change and structural change, which means reorganizing, restructuring cross-functionally by product, not project. It doesn't say complex projects, complex product. What does the customer see as the product? So it's not necessarily about software or a software development methodology. It's a framework because it could apply to whatever your product is. This is really about people working together. Hence the term Scrum, people working together in a rugby-like approach. But the challenge for leaders in your organizations is if they ask you to do this, they ask you to go to training, trainers like me are not only going to beg you to read the Scrum guide, we're going to structure entire exercises around the fact that you have to call out specific paragraphs in the Scrum guide. Before COVID hit, I was pretty notorious for carrying a printed copy around with me to most meetings. Now I can do it virtually over Zoom, like we're on, or over Microsoft Teams or something. But one of the last lunches I had with a CIO, whom I chose not to work with, kept talking about how if I came in to work with them, all the business analysts would start being called product owner. All the project managers would just start being called Scrum Master. And I'm like, that's not really what this is about. We're going to start with other questions. What are your goals and objectives? Who are your customers? What are your products? Then we'll start looking at identifying people, because there is no one-for-one correlation between the old waterfall roles and Scrum. And he persisted. So I just opened my Scrum guide, turned it to page 6 and said, read the paragraph that talks about what the product owner needs to be successful. And as he's reading, and it's talking about how product owners' decisions are not overturned, product owners have authority, he's like, I had no idea. Yes, I know. So it's like, wait a minute. You thought you were just going to tell your people to change to all this stuff, and you hadn't bothered to get knowledgeable about what that actually means. And as I probed further, and as we had the conversation, it was evident that they did not want to change, which is fine. If you're meeting your goals and objectives and delighting your customers and it's working for you, why bother? But there's nothing to be gained out of working the old way, but confusing everybody with new vocabulary. The other word that drives me crazy that gets misused is transformation. I keep hearing this, oh, we're doing a Scrum transformation, an Agile transformation. So have you reformed your teams? No. Oh, have you restructured in the organization? No. You're not transforming. The definition from dictionary.com is this means change in form, appearance, structure. So if there's been no structural change, you're not transforming. You might be transforming your vocabulary, but you're not really changing. So then people will start to blame a little bit. Well, we are asking for change, but you got to understand, our people are resisting a little bit. Well, let's give people the benefit of the doubt. As human beings, we tend not to resist change, right? If somebody pushes on your hand, you may push back, but think about that. That might be because something's being forced on them. So people tend to not automatically resist change. They tend to resist change that's thrust upon them and that they don't understand. So it might look like resistance. It might come across as resistance when, as leaders, we haven't laid out the path. We haven't given them the clear goals and objectives to say, not only here's why we're changing, but here's what that means. And here's what that looks like. Because if we confuse people, it may come across as resistance. And if you're giving them even more contradictory messages from the old way of doing work, in addition to the new stuff, it's no wonder people don't know what to do. So what can we do about it? If you're a Scrum Master or a coach who's going to be helping these leaders out, these are realistic, simple tips. If you are one of the leaders, they are also realistic, simple tips. There's a organization we have helped quite a bit that had us back in to do a little reassessment. It was right before COVID hit last year. And when we were giving some of our recommendations as a result of our assessment, the CIO I was talking to said, "Oh, here comes the sales pitch. I'm sure there's going to be, a couple slides of things I can spend my money on or buy." I just sat back for a minute and laughed. And I said, no, the first two are behavioral changes that cost you nothing other than making a decision. Sure, we can talk to you about helping you with that, but a lot of this stuff is perfectly within every organization's control, because that's really, at the end of the day, all that sets you apart from your competitors or from other organizations is the choices, the decisions we make inside those companies. And leaders are crucial to make those. So ensure that your people know. Be consistent and be clear about why the organization is making this change. Who will be impacted? How will we make this happen? And the thing that leaders sometimes misunderstand is the fact that you have to say it more than once. You have to say it more than twice, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. It can take up to 7 times for the average adult to get the message. And so leaders have to be very patient and very steadfast in just making sure that they're consistently communicating. The leaders that fall down on this assume that because they sent it in an email, it was understood, or because they said it once, that it was heard or interpreted the way that they expected it to be. And that's generally not the case. So they've got to be passionately, consistently sending the same message. Why are we doing this? Who is impacted? How are we going to make this happen? And what are the goals and objectives? So set those expectations about what the subsequent behavior changes are from people in the organization. Getting people to work together. That's what cross-functional. Not everybody has to do every skill. That's not what anybody's saying. Nobody's saying y'all have to be unicorns, but work together. That's what teamwork is, working together cross-functionally. Order people's work. Leaders don't realize that they could get an immediate jump in productivity if they simply did 2 simple things. Dedicate people, even if you're doing project management. If you dedicate people 100% and order the work, because if everything's priority, nothing is, you're going to see a jump in their productivity. And then provide those clear, measurable goals and objectives. Notice no A word was used in these tips, because it really doesn't have anything to do with that. It's not that these are Agile goals. These are just very simple goals and objectives for any organization to undertake. Now, certainly, if you want to use the A word, if you want to say Agile or Scrum, it's best to know what you're talking about. And the good news for leaders is it doesn't cost you a dime. The Agile Manifesto is out there for free, agilemanifesto.org. The Scrum Guide is free. And oh, by the way, it gets updated. The latest revision just happened in November of 2020, but you can always find the current one at scrumguides.org. And I had that URL in the material earlier for you. But the other thing is getting educated. So not only from a self-education point of view in reading on your own, but then maybe you send some of your leaders to some kind of training, or maybe you bring somebody in-house to do that. But I love that people send their team members to us for certified Scrum Master, product owner, developer. Awesome. But what we consistently hear is, but my leaders don't think that this is what this means. Well, have they read the Scrum Guide? Have they read the manifesto? So we want to make sure that we're being congruent. And this stuff doesn't always have to mean, 2 days, 3 days. No, there's really short leadership workshops available out there too. Clearly communicate what you mean when you say Agile. Have you chosen Scrum? Have you chosen extreme programming? Have you chosen DSDM? The challenge when people say things like, we're going to do a hybrid. Well, hybrids, let's think. If I go to drive home from the location I'm at tonight, and I decide to just do a hybrid, I'm just going to follow a hybrid of different driving rules, maybe from different countries, maybe from different parts of the world. What's going to happen? Am I likely to meet my goal and objective of getting home safely? Or could I potentially get in an accident? Could I get a ticket, depending on what speed I choose? So when we say hybrid, leaders don't understand you're confusing the crap out of your people even more, because it's hard enough for people to say, what are the rules of the game? Oh, we chose Scrum, boom, here's the rules of the game in the Scrum Guide. I got this, I can handle this. But now you start throwing rules from several other ways of doing work, some that even contradict it, like some of the rules in project management. Best of luck in meeting your goals and objectives. Best of luck meeting that destination. So what I would like to do is invite your questions. Mindy's going to help me out here, I think. I think she's been monitoring the chat or taking those from the live stream. Mindy, do we have any questions, or how would you like to facilitate the Q&A?
Okay, it doesn't look, I haven't seen any questions yet. You can type them in the chat, or if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, you're more than welcome to, whatever you are more comfortable doing. It is completely on you guys.
Okay,
Hi.
I can start. I'm Brad. Can you hear me?
Hi, Brad.
So I just started in a project, and I think we've been using waterfall. So one of the questions you started with was, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And from what I know, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, I think we're trying to deliver a product similarly to a waterfall way, where we have a milestone every 6 months or 9 months, right? And that is the problem we're trying to solve, but we just don't know how to. What are some questions that I should ask the leadership to get better understanding of how to break things down as a Scrum Master?
Yeah, I have a couple of favorites. What problem are we trying to solve? And even if that sounds negative, because you're saying problem, what is our goal? What does that look like? Walk me through it. So if I understand you correctly, you're telling us that this milestone has to be delivered in 6 months. What does success look like in delivering that? Who are the customers? How will we know that we're done? The other questions I like to flip it around is, by not making the changes that we need to, what additional problems are we causing? Not just what problem are we trying to solve, but what additional problems are we potentially causing? But I like to get real specific about the goals and objectives and ask them, how will we measure that? How will we know we're done? What does success look like? Walk me through it. Are
Okay,
those
can you,
useful to you, Brad?
yeah, can you go a little bit more into what are the problems we'll cause if we don't meet this 6 months milestone? Are we looking
Absolutely.
for, oh, we are not able to deploy this application? Or are you more like, we may lose a customer? Would they be,
Bit of both, right?
Okay.
I mean, bit of both. What happens if we don't do this? If we don't get this to market, do we lose the customer? Maybe you're in a regulated environment. Hey, if we don't get these regulatory compliance measures in place by that 6-month milestone, we may face fines from whatever the regulatory body is. Or if we completely miss a deadline, maybe there's something in the contract with the customer. Not only do we lose them, maybe they're off the hook for paying us and we've spent all this money. So yeah, there's all kinds of things that could happen depending on whatever the milestone is. You know, it's a little nebulous because I don't know what the product is that you're talking about, but those are some things that I would drill into.
okay, from a team perspective, I'm sorry, I'm going to squeeze one more in.
Sure,
From a
go ahead.
team perspective, who has not been part of Agile ceremonies or Agile behavior, they usually crunch all the work at the last minute. How do you coach them? Do you just explain to them what a Scrum is, what an Agile is first, then start doing this 2-week sprint cadence, or where do I start?
Yeah, the Scrum Guide is available to you because a lot of people will say, I don't have training materials. Sure you do. It's a 14-page document for free. And the Scrum Master, which is what I heard you say your role is, correct me if I'm wrong there.
You're right.
Your responsibility is to teach. It's right in the guide that you're the coach and the teacher. In fact, if you move on to get higher level certs like the Certified Scrum Professional Scrum Master, one of the learning objectives in that program is one of my favorites because there's a teach back because Scrum Masters are the teachers. And I think it's a disservice to your teams if we say, hey, we're going Agile, just start sprinting. And they're like, what the heck do you mean? So set aside a little time before you start sprinting so that they have a chance to ask you questions, to read the Scrum Guide, in particular, page 5, because that concerns them about what's expected of them. And then they're going to get better and better with each one because you have the retrospectives to use also. But set aside a little time to not only get them trained, which doesn't have to take long, a long time. But the other thing I would recommend is make sure they establish some sort of an agreement. Because if you have a collection of people who have no working agreement, you don't really have a team. Definitionally, that's not a team. Teams have agreements. And so that agreement at a minimum has to have things in it like, how are we going to make decisions? Because inevitably, if there's a tie or people can't decide, how are we going to move on? Because browbeating each other till somebody gives is no way to make decisions. So examples are best 2 out of 3, majority rules. I've even got a team of leaders that I coached who use rock, paper, scissors. And the first time I saw them do it, I'm like, yeah, let's see if the highest paid person just overrules anyway. And no, she went along with it. She abided by that, but that was their stated decision-making process. So that's one of the things you're going to have to establish in addition to getting them trained. Did that help, Brad?
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi.
Go ahead, Mindy.
Hello.
Oh, it's Maria. Okay, see, I see Mindy's mouth moving, but I hear Maria talking.
Sorry, Mindy. I think you're in mute, but anyway. Sorry, I'm from.
Now they're both on mute.
Oh, sorry, guys. Sorry, my English. I'm here
Whoops.
in Brazil. Can you hear me now?
I can totally hear you.
Okay, so after
Okay.
Maria, I had Kat message me private too, so I didn't realize I was on mute. So yeah, well,
Okay.
after Maria, I got a question from Kat that messaged me as well.
Gotcha.
All right, go ahead, Maria.
Okay, so I'm a Scrum Master and I work for a company that it's I'm very new. I just joined it in 2 months ago. and it's all agile. So all agile, they say that they are inspired by Toyota and TPS, right? And they say that everything is agile. But I think as you know, I read, I'm a Scrum Master from Agile, from Scrum.org. So I know about the Agile manifesto and all the things, but I think they are not totally Agile, you know, and they are very, very, I mean, they talk a lot of processes. So the first thing about the individuals and the iterations, it's not okay. It's not totally okay. They put the process in the first. And there's a lot of processes. There is a lot of metrics. I don't know. I'm a new, and I'm afraid that I'm to change their minds, you know, but I feel uncomfortable sometimes because they they are so proud because about the agile, but I know that it's not 100%. For example,
Yeah.
I'm a Scrum Master. I have the Scrum team now. It's a Scrum team, but for example, it's very, very divided. We have an architect. We have the back end and the front end and the key way. So it's totally it's very, very divided, the team. And we have a PM, we have a project manager, which
And you said your role is Scrum Master, Maria?
yes, and the project manager used to be a Scrum Master, so she got up, right, in the career, and sometimes she thinks that she's still Scrum Master, and this is confusing for the team. So I'm not sure what I'm doing. So I'm
Well, I
trying
don't
to
blame
do my
you,
best.
Maria, because it sounds like they're confusing the crap out of all of you. One of the Scrum values is courage. And I know sometimes that's hard to exhibit because people will say, well, what if I need my paycheck? Well, I was in that spot too. And trust me, I knew right where that line was. And sometimes I would tiptoe right up to it with my questions, and then I would back off just to stay employed, right? And then I got to a
Yeah.
place in my career where it was like, this is not worth the pain. And I crossed that line and found a new job. So if I were you, you don't have to do it in a way that challenges somebody's authority. Certainly, you know, I'm just a crabby old lady. So the way I say some things comes out kind of sarcastic, but you can just phrase it in a very honest way that says, you know, I'm just really confused. I want to meet goals and objectives, senior leader, boss person, whoever. I'm just confused as hell because I've been asked to do work this way, yet we're doing work the opposite. So what should I do, senior leader? Put it back on them and make them articulate that. Ask them, what is the goal here? Because you're telling me two different things and I am completely confused. What leader, upon hearing that the people trying to meet their goals and objectives is saying, I don't know what the heck you mean? I would think that they would at least talk to you about that. Can you do that? Can you ask some of those questions?
Not now, but I think I can in some way. I'll find
Okay.
it.
However that works
Yeah,
for you, like I said.
Yeah, I mean, I could,
I'm not sure if that was Maria or if that was Mindy breaking in because you said Katrina had the next one after Maria.
We had a
Yeah.
question. We had a question from Kat. I don't know if that wasn't me cutting in. I don't know if somebody just unmuted or.
yeah, I was just going to, but
Mm.
if you want to go ahead, that's fine.
Yep.
I was only going to
I am.
relate to the
And
last speaker.
sorry to interrupt. And thank you,
Mhm.
Angela.
Okay, so sorry guys. We had Kat had private messaged me a direct message, so I just wanted to make sure we got this one in. How do you suggest handling managers who think they know what Scrum is and think is in capital letters and constantly contradict everything you do as a Scrum Master?
Yeah, I put data in front of them. And by data, I mean the Scrum Guide, the Scrum Master checklist. These things are freely available on the internet. There's also on InfoQ, if you go give it a look, there's the case for the dedicated Scrum Master. So when I was telling you the story earlier about the lunch prior to COVID with that CIO, I literally do that. I will open the Scrum Guide to a particular paragraph and I will say, read that out loud to me, please. Or even read it to yourself, right? If they want to read it to themselves. And it's like, so you see what I've been trained to do and what the official Scrum paragraph says to you there. Now you just asked me to do something the opposite. And I don't know what you want me to do because those are two conflicting things. Now from there, you don't know what they're going to say until you do it. Because if we're making assumptions about what they know or they don't know, that's dangerous on your part too, because that's your ego, that's your amygdala telling yourself a story. Oh, well, they already know what this is and you don't know that. So I prefer no assumptions. I prefer to find out for sure. So it's like, read this. Do you understand why I'm confused? Because I want to meet goals and objectives. I really do, but I'm struggling here because I've been asked by you to do two things that contradict each other. And you can find what I don't know more about your situation because it was kind of nebulous, but if it's something about you executing in the Scrum Master role or something you're supposed to be doing to serve the developers or the product owner, the Scrum Master checklist kind of breaks that down, right, in different sections, but so does the Scrum Guide where it talks about the different aspects of your service that you're supposed to be available to, but also the other roles as well. So that's what I would do. I would get real specific with them with data. I don't know if Mindy, that was a conversation stopper or there's one in the chat.
You go ahead, man. Go, if you can. Yep, there is another one in the chat. Onexa.
Oksana? I think it's Oksana.
Yeah,
So
I'm like, what would you recommend if one of the team members refuses to attend daily stand-ups?
Well, along the lines of, our ego is not our amigo, find out why. I would want to know why. And the other thing about daily stand-up, is it really a daily stand-up? Because Scrum has no such rule. It never has. It's called a daily Scrum. You don't actually have to stand. And according to the Scrum Guide, that event is for the team members to talk to each other. So I don't know why your particular person, and maybe you don't either, is refusing to come. Do they come because they feel put on the spot because somebody is calling on them? Because that's not the Scrum Master's role. Scrum Master doesn't conduct the daily Scrum. Do they not come because they think it's a status report? Because that's also not the intention, regardless of whether you're doing daily Scrum or you're borrowing daily stand-up from XP. Both of them were intended to be synchronization opportunities for team members. So it's supposed to be for them to talk to each other. So when you get team members saying things like, well, I hate this Scrum stuff, or oh, this daily Scrum is stupid. Why do we have to go give a laundry list of everything we did yesterday? That's not the intention. In fact, according to your Scrum Guide, there are no 3 suggested questions anymore. I don't know if you guys know that. And if that's news to you, you should go check that out. Because now the guide is just very clear saying, this is for the team members, this is for the developers. They can conduct it in any way they'd like to, as long as they're talking about their sprint goal. So all that's intended for them to say is, hey, am I on track for the sprint goal or not? Because maybe this developer doesn't know that. And maybe even finding out that they are intended to conduct it. Now, all of a sudden, they've got skin in the game. That's how you get empowerment. That's how you get buy-in, not when you impose things on somebody that were never intended. So I would want to drill down. If I were Oksana, I would drill down to why. Can you have a one-on-one conversation with that team member and find out what's running through their head about this daily thing? And can we correct that with some of the things I just provided about, like what I said, what's in the guide about the daily Scrum?
We have another one. If a product owner comes with changes as a new Scrum Master, what do you do?
Well, so I'd want to know comes with changes. Comes with changes when? Because we respond to change over following a plan. The Scrum framework is built on 3 things: transparency, inspection, adaptation, yes, even down to the daily level. Because if they're bringing a new change during refinement, that's perfectly appropriate. And that's when we talk about new items on the product backlog. If they're bringing the change up at sprint planning, again, totally appropriate, because the sprint is transparency, inspect, adapt on the product. Every sprint planning, we have a chance to course correct where we're headed with this thing. Now, during the sprint, now this is where it gets a little nuanced. And since they didn't clarify where the change is coming, I just want to make sure that if it's during the sprint, no changes are introduced if they derail the sprint goal. Because if there's just nuanced little changes, of course, those are going to happen. When your developers get their hands into something, or the product owner's like, oh, hey, now that I see it, here's what we could do. As long as it's still within the boundaries of the sprint goal, those changes are not only welcomed, they're expected. But let's just say it's something that's going to totally derail the sprint goal. It's just going to bomb the whole thing. Well, according to the guide, the product owner is the only one who can terminate the sprint. So it's plate management. Ideally, the product owner isn't saying, oh, you have to do the stuff for the sprint goal and this thing that I just cooked up, or this thing that I just am deciding to pull in. He or she would have to pull something off, right? If something comes on, something has to come off, because inside a sprint, the work has to get done. There is no concept of carryover. So the work is either done or it's not done. The other thing the product owner could do is just terminate it. You know, this other thing that just came up really is worth stopping y'all on what you're doing right now, because we've got to have a little chat about this new thing. We'll get back to the other things at another time, put them back on the product backlog. So it is the product owner's decision, but Scrum Master, your job is to make sure that it's not overloading the team's plate, that the conversation actually happened. If something is coming on, something has to come off. Or does the product owner want to terminate it if it's in the sprint? Or if it's refinement or sprint planning, those are appropriate. Those are appropriate times to bring up changes. So hopefully that was helpful. Was there another question in the chat, Mindy, or?
I haven't seen any other ones. Does
have a
anybody else
question.
have you? Oh, go ahead, Brian.
Yes. So if we go back to the concept of a leader that really kind of derails things, and I know that Scrum Guide, since Scrum is typically a method that teams are going to be using, what if as a Kanban team, what do you use as a reference material to try to true back a leader to understand? Because I work in a large organization, a lot of folks have been around Agile, so they believe they know it, but they've never been to training for Kanban, for Scrum, anything. It's just they've been around what they saw within the company, and it's often wrong. So I can get, if it's Scrum, go to the Scrum Guide as a reference. What about for Kanban?
I just dropped this into the chat, Brian, for you. The one that our team subscribes to is Kanban University. David J. Anderson is the person who is credited, if you will, with pulling some of those ideas, again, from our friends at Toyota into a more formalized way of doing work. And Kanban University has all kinds of things, right? There's all kinds of publications out there. There's no counterpart to the guide, but they have what they call rules or properties. And there are 6 of those. And those are posted on their site for free. Of course, you learn about those when you go to some of their classes. And I don't mean to start a holy war, because there's another competitor to Kanban University that has popped up on the scene very recently. Excuse me. But Kanban University is the one that our team follows. And that's pretty close to what those rules are, because the thing about Kanban, and I kind of picked up on this from what you said when you started your question, that's another word. People love to just glom onto. And the thing that we tend to do in the United States is we tend to think that rules for language are exactly the same in English as they are in everybody else's language, right?
Mhm.
And that just makes us look so silly. Because are you using Kanban as a noun? Or are you using it as a verb? Because in its simplest form, if you're using it as a noun and pointing to some chart, well, that's a Kanban. Okay, that's one possible translation of it, but it could also mean that you're, looking at the chart and using it to manage work. But you get these teams that are copying without knowledge, or like you said, these leaders who don't know, and they'll say something really silly like, we're doing Scrum, but look at our Kanban board.
Mhm.
That's just a sprint backlog if you're doing Scrum. So what value are you getting out of introducing a Japanese word that you don't really understand?
Yeah, so
You
in
know
our
what I'm
case, it is,
saying?
trying to manage a workflow, but the one product manager likes Kanban better, and so he doesn't want to change because the other teams are Scrum, but he's reluctant to change because he feels that since it just says what you covered in the topic,
Yeah.
that if it is in a sprint, he's more confined and constrained in being able to make a whimsical change, that he would like to take something in a slightly different direction.
Oh, so held accountable.
And so that's why he wants to remain as Kanban, but it's hard to get him to understand the concepts, as you're saying, without having some, because he won't go to class, but then to put material in front of him to try to get him to learn more about what the methodology actually is has been a little challenging. So I appreciate the answer.
Yeah, check out Kanban University, because the other thing, the second rule, once you get beyond the chart, right? Yeah, the first rule is visualize the flow. But the second rule is about limiting work in progress. So that's cool. Oh, you don't want to limit work in progress by using a sprint? Cool. What do you recommend? How do we want to limit our work in progress? Because there has to be a measurement to do that. Because then what do you mean? Because Kanban doesn't mean, like you said, just changing your mind at any time. That's not what that means.
Exactly. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we have another question in there. Usually agile transformation is difficult in large organizations because there's a lot of top to bottom management. How can you affect change, or is it better to seek a job somewhere else where it's easier to adapt?
It's never necessarily easy, right? Any change you undertake may seem hard at first. And so large organizations, see, there's another subjective word, because when we say large, what do we mean? Are we talking like 5,000 people or 50,000 people, right? So I agree that generally the larger the organization, the slower it's going to be to steer that ship, right? It's going to be slower to change, because you're right. There's a lot more layers. There's potentially other things that we're not thinking about. Is it publicly traded? Is it a publicly traded company? So there's shareholders to be beholden to, or is it privately held? Because privately held companies tend to be able to make those decisions more quickly than ones that have to answer to shareholders. So you can do what you can to affect change, because I see that wrapped in your question there. Can I help change it? Can I help bring about this change? Is there nothing I can do? Or maybe you've tried. And when I teach people in Scrum Master classes, I always say, this is all about changing your company. So to your last point about seeking a job somewhere else, I always say, get busy trying to change your company or change your company. You know what I'm saying? You got 2 feet. Nobody's making you work there. But don't kid yourself. It's not necessarily going to be easier elsewhere. The grass isn't always greener. So you have the advantage of asking a lot of questions when you're in job search mode, because when you're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. And then you can decide if you want to work there or not. But I would say there's other things that come into play when you make that decision to leave or not. Are you happy? Do you like the people you work with? Do you believe in the company's overall mission? Do you believe in the company's products? Are you one of the company's customers, right? Is that why you even got attracted to the company in the first place? So it's going to be uncomfortable. Any kind of change is. I mean, good Lord, I talked about the weight loss thing. And don't think that that's just an example I pulled out of the top of my head. We actually bought a treadmill, and of course our friends laughed at us. They're like, is there going to be clothes hanging on it, in a few weeks? It's like, no, we're actually going to start to use it. Okay. So I used it once the first week, but it's one more time than the week before. So is that change hard for me to get on board with? Yeah, it hasn't been the easiest, but you got to stick with it, right? You got to stick with it because any worth doing isn't easy, right? So you're going to have a lot of things to decide for yourself, but there is no easy answer. I saw another one in there too, Katrina. Oh, I'm sorry, Mindy. I think you're the one managing the chat.
Yep, it's okay. So we have got a couple that have popped in now. What is expected of a new Scrum Master in a team that is starting from scratch with Agile methodology and implementation? What is the best route to follow?
So new Scrum Masters, your job is a little more intense at the beginning because there's 3 parts to your job. A lot of new Scrum Masters will assume it's only about the developers, the people doing the work, when the 3 parts of your job are not only the developers, but the product owner and the greater organization. So all the organizational stuff I was talking about in the presentation tonight, that is your job to tackle those organizational impediments. So when you're new, yes, you may have to get the team going, right? You may have to get the team going, make sure the product owner's going with refinement. You're also going to need to make sure, though, that all those things that are available to you in this presentation are agreed to, right? Why are we doing this? Is Scrum our chosen way of doing work? Okay, what is the product? Do we have all the cross-functional skills on this dedicated Scrum team to deliver said product or not? Because there may be your first organizational impediment to tackle. Does the product owner know how to do refinement with the developers? Have we sat down and come up with a working agreement with the team? Does the team know what they're getting themselves into by changing the way they do work to use Scrum? So much like the earlier question, you may have to hold a little training with them. So the harder part is getting started. And a lot of people will wait to get started. So don't do that, but do your due diligence. Make sure you've got everybody aligned, that you've trained people, you've got a working agreement, and then adapt once you get going, right? Just adapt. Transparency, inspect, adapt. So that's what I would say for getting started.
Okay, and then we have, have a UX and a UI designer on the Scrum team, do they create tasks at the user story level in Scrum for transparency? Should I account for the capacity in the sprint? Does the team estimate the effort for those tasks?
So this is where we get into, there is no specialized skill recognized on a team of developers. And I refer to it so much, I'm telling you the page number off the top of my head, page 5 of the Scrum Guide, right? It's like the developers are professionals who have all the skills needed to deliver an increment of that product. So you don't have somebody that says, I'm just the UX person. I'm only going to do UX tasks. I'm just a programmer. I'm only going to do those tasks. It's about them working together on an item. Now, the question said user story. Again, the term in Scrum is product backlog item. So if your product owner has chosen to use user stories, it's in violent agreement with a product backlog item. There is no such thing as a front-end story, design story, back-end story, programming story. That's again a misuse of the user story. User stories and product backlog items slice vertically across those horizontal layers. So whether you're doing extreme programming or Scrum, again, they're in violent agreement with each other that those teams would work together. And what you're describing as UI, UX, I'm going to throw in coding, testing, those are tasks. So the story gets broken down into tasks, but the team decides amongst themselves who's going to work on what. Now, if the UI person or UX person says, I don't wanna work with anybody else, nor do I want to do any other tasks or learn anything new. That isn't a Scrum problem, and that is not an Agile problem. That is a people problem. And when you're new, this may go back to the previous question, when you're new, a lot of new Scrum Masters underestimate the people problems. And let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Did the leader set the expectations of the behaviors that are now expected under this new way of doing work? Or did the leaders not do that? And then as the Scrum Master in that scenario, I ask really overt questions. Are you telling me you don't know how to add value with any other skills, but you're willing to learn? Because we can pair you with other people and you can pick up these new skills. Or are you telling me you don't want to do other things? But that is your job as a Scrum Master, is educating people on that and finding out. And then you have to escalate within the organization if it does turn out to be a people problem.
Okay, and that looks like pretty much any questions in the chat. Does anybody else have any other questions?
I have a comment on something in the chat about the stand-up. Just so folks know, it's not that I don't know people use the term stand-up. I'm just letting you know where it comes from. Standing as a practice came from extreme programming teams, because in extreme programming, teams are expected to sit together in a room called a lab. And this is all available in Extreme Programming Explained or extremeprogramming.org. And so because they were co-located in a lab, they would simply stand and make a plan for the day. Now, over in the daily Scrum guides never prescribed standing, because if you tell a team, hey, you guys have to stand, you're disempowering them. And then don't be surprised when they go, oh, we're being told we have to stand. This is stupid, because it wasn't their idea. So they get to decide, do we want to stand or not? Sure, some people have adopted the standing practice because it can keep it short and sweet, but so can a timer, so can a clock, so can a team working agreement, and sticking to the fact that you're only supposed to be talking about the sprint goal. Are we on track for the sprint goal? We're not on track for the sprint goal, right? So that one caught my eye.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Other questions?
Anyone else have any other questions?
Yes, Christina, good evening. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm all right. I am a database administrator, but trying to switch to Scrum. I just passed my certification. And my greatest question is, how do I blend this two at the same time? Knowing that developers, the role, I've played a role like a developer, and now I'm going to play a role like a Scrum Master.
That's a really great question. And I don't know if you know a little bit about my background. In another life, I did database administration work. And I used to code, and the source code was 100% in Oracle. The company is now owned by Oracle, as a matter of fact. And I enjoyed that work. Don't get me wrong. It's just that as a Scrum Master, your job is to be a coach, a teacher, to be a neutral. And so the last thing you want to do is become the answer person, or to even give the appearance that you're telling them what to do. So I don't know if you follow sports or anything like that, but I tend to follow American football. I can't tell you a time when I've seen a coach run out onto the field of play and rip the ball out of a player's hands. Oh, here, give me that. I can do it myself. Oh, here, let me just tell you how to do it. That's not coaching. That's learned helplessness. And so it's not that people like you and I, because I come from the same kind of technical background, it's not that we can't become Scrum Masters. It's just that we have to recognize we're not there to do the work for them. We're not there to solve the problems. We're there to help them get better, to help them help themselves. So you may have an answer pop in your head. And my advice to people when that happens, turn it into a form of a question. Turn it into the form of a question. Make them do the work. So even if you know the answer, could you ask some sort of a leading question? For example, there's a Scrum Master I was trying to help in this regard who had been a tester. And he would say really silly things to his team like, I'm taking my Scrum Master hat off and I'm putting my tester hat on to tell you guys, oh dear God. First of all, there's no hats. No hats. And second of all, what I was trying to get him to see is that what he was really telling them, I'm smarter than you. I know more than you. Well, so much for servant leadership on top of neutrality, because the Scrum Master is supposed to be a servant leader, which means it's not about you. So I tried to get him to say, hey, what's that thing you guys have been missing where you don't break something that was working before? He rolled his eyes at me and he goes, oh, they're just gonna know then that I mean regression testing. So if they come up with the answer, they're more likely to remember it and to actually do it. If you're going to just tell them what to do, they are going to start to resent you for it. Right. And that's not coaching. So you can do it, my friend. You can choose to make that switch. You just may have to let the tech stuff go. Is that helpful? I know you went back on mute. Right? But,
yes, Christina, it's helpful. Thank you so much.
Yep.
And sorry about that. My baby is giving me
That's
some
okay.
hard time.
I always say pet cam, kid cam right now is perfectly okay.
I have a quick question about coaching. If you want to get like somebody who is experienced like you to coach that, coach me, or how do I do it? Just link up with you?
Yeah, you can certainly connect with me on LinkedIn and I can talk to you about what our company offers. There's also all kinds of coaching courses, programs, and so on. But yeah, you can also engage a coach.
Okay. I would definitely do that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I saw Sarah's note. She's like, oh, my boss says that all the time, the hats. I'm like, yeah, there's no hat. There's no hat. Love that. So good.
All right. Does anyone else have any other questions? Double check in the chat. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and feel free to ask them. I'm just kind of making sure I haven't missed anything in the chat really quick.
There's a question about recording, and I think we are still recording. So I think you folks send that out.
We will, once it's done, once we're done with it and editing and everything, participants will get, everybody that's registered, there will be an email that goes out and it will be posted in our LinkedIn event page as well.
Awesome. And thank you to everybody who's already sent me LinkedIn invitations. I love linking in with people.
What's the right LinkedIn account? Your name on LinkedIn?
Oh, yeah. If you put in Angela Johnson and then just put Scrum, I'll pop right up. But if you just put in Angela Johnson, like 30,000 of them come up. But I'm the only one that's got Scrum in there. It's Angela Johnson Scrum Trainer is the name of the profile.
And Eddie, I just posted our LinkedIn event pages, so you have it there since you asked for it. You're welcome. All right, I think that's no. Anybody else have any more questions? Just want to make sure we've got everything.
And I have a question. I have a question, if it's possible.
Sure,
Yeah,
Oksana.
right ahead.
Thank you. What would you recommend if team would like to focus on improving performance? What steps would you recommend?
Do you mean their own performance or performance of the product? You know, like some sort of technology performance. Can you clarify that for me?
I suppose maybe their own performance. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. That's what the retrospective is all about, because it's all about promoting growth in the developers and the product owner, because the retrospective is intended to yield one, no more than two process improvements. And you may have to find out, is there anything needed in order for them to do that? Because sometimes it's just them working together, but sometimes it may involve some sort of skill building or additional training, because then if it costs money, you're going to have to make sure you get support from the right place within the organization. But that's what we want. We love it when teams are interested in continuous improvement. It's right there in your manifesto, because it's kind of a red flag when people don't want to improve. So you can easily mark that out of capacity if anybody is attending a training class or anything like that. But if it's learning on the job, that's the best. And I always point that out to folks too, who say, well, what if I had to go learn this? It's like, well, did you learn absolutely everything for your job in a college class or, in some sort of training before you got your job? No, I learned a lot at work. Exactly. So what can you take advantage of within the Scrum team for them to help each other to improve their performance? And then what does that look like? Because the nice thing is, even though it's a couple improvements or one, no more than two improvements from a sprint retrospective, they can even put it right on their sprint backlog so that there's traceability or transparency during the sprint to see if they are advancing, if they are getting better. Was that kind of where you were headed with performance, Oksana, or was it something else?
Yeah, thank you so much. And if we will talk about product performance, what would you recommend?
Yeah. So if it's the product performance, then you've got refinement. So you may have to tighten up your definition of done or refine your definition of done if it's not getting specific enough with the criteria, which translates then into tests and things the team is checking on. Or let's say from a performance perspective, it's some sort of technical debt, that cut corners, missed tests, whatever, pretty poor coding practices that are affecting the product. The product owner can order those things right on the product backlog in relation to the other things, as long as we're doing our due diligence to make sure the product owner understands there is bang for your buck here. You are going to get improvement if they do this kind of work, even though it doesn't seem like it's a new feature. So that's just stuff that has to be ordered on the backlog. Or if it's just tightening up their practices, what's in our definition of done, so that we catch things in testing.
Okay, thank you so much. It's very valuable.
You're welcome.